Thank you, Adam. I want you to turn with me to Psalm 55. Psalm 55, we're going to be looking at the whole of that text this morning, but I promise you we'll get out in time. I was informed that the clock on the wall is not working, and they told me to finish by 12, and right now it's 20 minutes till 11, according to that. I don't have that much stuff. Psalm 55, we're going to begin reading at verse 1. We'll skip over some of them and just read portion, but we'll take it all in its context. So if you have your Bibles open to that passage, and we'll start reading at verse 1. Listen to my prayer, O God, and do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught at the voice of the enemy, at the stares of the wicked. For they bring down suffering upon me and revile me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me, and the terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling have beset me, and horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. Verse 12, as David speaks directly to a person that has caused his agony. He says, if an enemy were insulting me, I would endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it's you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I enjoyed sweet fellowship as we walked with the throng at the house of God. In verse 16, he says, but I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening and morning and noon I cry out in distress. Here's my voice. He ransoms me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned forever, will hear them and afflict them. And then verse 22, cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. And the very last part of verse 23, but as for me, I trust in you. I grew up in Baton Rouge, as was stated a few minutes ago, and I grew up going to a small school that in that particular parish did not have enough money for a full-time music teacher. So they rotated. I forget exactly how often they came, maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. I just remember the lady's name. It was Miss French, and she'd make her way around to all the classes. And she tried to teach us music, but if you'd sat by me, you would have said, well, she didn't do a very good job. But she tried to teach us using rounds. And we had 6 rows in that place, and here were two. She would start these 2, the next 2 would come in, the next 2 would come in, and I guess she was trying to teach us something about harmony, pitch. I don't really know. I didn't learn it. That's the truth. But the only thing I remember that Miss French did was she taught us to sing a song that I've not sung since I was in that class or since I was a child. It's Row, Row, Row Your Boat. What I did realize, though, as an adult, is that the song that Miss French taught us to sing as a child, without any evil intent, she taught us to sing a lie. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 light is but a dream. I'm almost 62, and I've learned in the 62 years of living and the 44 years in the ministry that most of my rowing has not been downstream, it has been upstream. And it has not been a gentle kind of rowing, because there are boulders I'm trying to keep from running into, and there are rapids I'm trying to keep from being caught up in, and there are waterfalls I'm trying to keep from going over. Life is full of difficulties. In fact, I've also discovered it's not all dreams, but there are some nightmares along the way. In fact, if you keep waking up saying, good morning, Lord, there are going to be those mornings you're going to wake up and say, good Lord, it is morning. Is it life? is filled with burdens. The truth of the matter is, everybody in here has just come out of a burden, you're in the middle of a burden, or you're headed for one. Now, I know you didn't come for that today, but it's truth. And we live with struggles, difficulties. It was Joseph Parker who said, preach to broken hearts, there's one on every pew. And I've discovered there's not only one on every pew, there's one behind every pulpit, there's one behind every musical instrument in every choir loft. Every one of us experience struggles and burdens. It's not whether or not we're going to experience those burdens in life, it's what we do with them. What we do with them determines whether or not we live a life full of victory or whether we live a life of defeat. So what do you do with the burdens that come your way? Now, the Psalm insight. David doesn't tell us much about his trouble as far as the specific nature of that problem and details around it. What we do know is how it affected him. And look at some of the words that David uses as how the problem that he was going through affected him. He uses words like troubled, distraught, suffering, a heart that is anguished, terrors of death, trembling, being overwhelmed. Those were the struggles and the way it affected him. Whatever it was, it came his way. Now, we do know a little bit about it. We do know from reading that text in verse 12 that the problem that he had was a relationship problem. It was somebody that he went to church with. It was somebody that he worshiped with. It was more than just sitting next to him and singing with them and worshiping with them and praying with them. Here was somebody he had a real close, intimate relationship with in the house of God, somebody that he could call one of his best friends in the work of God. Here, this person had done something, whatever it was, to him in such a way that now he does not call this person a friend, but he now perceives him to be an enemy. And that deep hurt that he experienced left him with fear and trembling and a broken heart. And one who even had the terrors of death on him, and distraught and overwhelmed. Now, your trouble may not have anything to do with that. Now, I can tell you, if you stay in the ministry long enough, it will. I hate to know the number of people that I've, without intent, hurt in my 44 years of ministry and pastoring. We do that. We hurt each other. We fail each other. But that may not be your problem at all. It may not be your difficulty. What you may be experiencing today is you may be a seminary student or a professor that have come in here today, and there's just not enough money at the end of the month to pay what you've got. You struggle. Some of you sit here today and you work 40 hours a week trying to earn a living, and you're taking 15 hours trying to get through your seminary, and you're pastoring a church on the weekend, and all of that you're trying to hold your church together, trying to hold your family together, and there's struggles. There's some of you that are in here today that you probably sit here, if it's a normal seminary crowd, then you are like other people outside this place. You wonder, am I going to be able to hold my family together? Is my wife going to stay with me? Is my husband going to stay with me? Are we going to be together by the end of the week even? And maybe you find yourself with a child that's sick, or you've gone to the doctor, your wife's gone to the doctor like my neighbor in seminary and found out here almost time to graduate, and his wife had a terminal disease. Or as one of the professors who was also working on his PhD, Oscar Thompson, when I was there, who wrote Concentric Circles of Concern, find out that he's got a brain tumor, cancer, and he's dying. You see, it could be any number of things. Trouble comes. But whatever it is, if you were going to just tell me how it affects you, you might use the same words. You might say, I'm distraught over this. I am so overwhelmed over this. And fears. Well, David's initial response was to run. He said, oh, I wish I had wings of a dove. I tell you what I'd do. If I had wings of a dove, I'd fly far away from here. I'd go out in the desert. That's what I'd do. And I somehow believe that's probably the way many of us feel in the midst of our struggles. That's the way Elijah felt. Elijah runs to a cave. That's the way Jeremiah felt. If you read the 9th chapter, when Jeremiah begins to weep over the condition of his people, and he says, cries out, oh God, I wish I had a head that was like a spring, and I wish I had eyes that were like fountains. I would weep over the people. And then he turns from that and he says, oh, I wish I had a place out in the desert somewhere where as a traveler I could go and I could be far away from these people who are so unfaithful and who are adulterous. I want to get away from the people that I'm trying to. He wanted to run. And you've seen it, I've seen it. Somebody's in a bad marriage and the first thing they want to do is to run. They think maybe the grass is greener on the other side, only to find out when they get on the other side it was nothing but astroturf. And then somebody wants to run to another job. I've seen in the ministry, I know a guy that has run all of his life. Every time he went to a church for the first 6 months, it was the best thing since sliced bread. It was a wonderful place to minister. Everybody loved him. Everything went well. After about 6 months, we'd be talking. He said, I got to get out of here. This is terrible. The deacons all hate me. People all hate me. And they're fixing to come down on me. I got to get out of here. And he'd run and run and run, never realizing that the real problems, every time he moved, were in the suitcase and moved with him. And finally, he says, I think the best thing for me to do is be a church planter. Start it myself. And after about 6 months, he said, you know, this is tough. And he quit being a church planter. It's easy to run. I remember as a child, and I can't tell you to this day what all happened. I know this, that we had a pretty stable family. But my mother, who was she often called herself an illegitimate child. I said, Mom, you weren't an illegitimate child. There's no such thing as illegitimate children. There's illegitimate parents. And her mother had her out of wedlock and just discarded her and told her grandmother, which is my grandmother's mother, to raise her, and then she continued her while. But later on in life, when we all were there at the house and we had 4 boys living in a little 2-bedroom, about a 900-square-foot house and 1 bathroom, we had to take my grandmother in, who was mentally ill. And I would say now, looking back, we became dysfunctional. It was really bad. And I don't know what prompted it that particular day, but that particular day I said, I've had about all I'm going to take of this, and I went into the closet. Now, you have to understand, we had 1 closet for me and my brothers, and there's something about the Jenkins family. The younger you are, the bigger you are. So we were all about 2 years apart, and so at that point, we were all the same size. We wore the same size pants, the same size shirts, the same size shoes. In fact, we had the very few of those things that we had in the closet were all in the same closet together, and the way we lived, the first one in was the best dressed out. And we all had 1 little bitty box in there. We'd gotten it from a party that was at my father's business. It was a little suitcase, cardboard. And in that little suitcase was everything that was our private stash. I mean, everything that I belonged. You didn't touch that. I didn't touch yours. Didn't have a lock on it. It was just cardboard. But I went in there and I got that little cardboard box and I dumped everything out of it, and I put 3 weekly readers and 4 pair of underwear in it. Now, some of you are trying to figure that out, and you'll spend the rest of the day trying to analyze that. Let me save you some time. My teachers always told me to be well read. That's the weekly readers. My mother always said, make sure you always have clean underwear on. You never know when you're going to have a wreck and be taken to the hospital. Has anybody ever been told that? Was I the only one that was told that? In fact, my wife and I had a wreck a couple years ago, and we had a head-on collision and got us out of that pickup truck, and we were both in the same ambulance. I wasn't hurting until they put that one-size-all-fits neck brace on me, and I don't have much of a neck, and so it stretched my neck, and I'm laying there, and she's in severe pain, and as she was in there, I sat there thinking back those words of my mother. You never know when you're going to have an accident and have clean underwear on, and I just leaned over to my wife and said, Mom would be proud of me today. She said, what? I said, I put clean underwear on before I came today. Well, I got that box. And I got my bicycle, and I rode down the road a little ways. And I got to think about how dark those woods were and how nobody was going to be in the woods. And I was going to be by myself. There was no food there. And for a chunky little boy, that didn't sit well. And I turned that bicycle around and I went straight back to the house. It doesn't take David long until David realizes that running is not an option. That's not what he needs to do, is to run. He comes to verse 16, he says, but I called to God. Instead of running, I called to God, and the Lord saved me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and He hears my voice. He knew where to run. Not away from, but run to. And that was running to the Lord. And then he comes to that verse, which is both an admonition and a promise. Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. And it is in that verse that He gives us what we need to do with the trouble our way. Now, I'm going to give you 3 walking points. You just jot them down. Remember them. Here's what you need to do when trouble comes your way, when the burdens of life are pressed in on you. The first thing you need to do is admit they're bigger than you are. Now, he uses the term here, cast it, and put it somewhere else. You're going to put it somewhere else because you can't handle it. The word that he uses here to talk about, that is translated in mind, cares or burdens in some, is a word that really means comes your way, providence. In other words, you didn't ask for this. It was not something he wanted. He didn't want the friend to do whatever the friend did to him. There are troubles in life like that. I've never seen anybody that says, I can't wait to go to the doctor today and to find out I've got a terminal disease. To my knowledge, I've never had anybody stand before that I've conducted a wedding, and for those 2 people, one of them standing there saying to themselves, or even have said to the person, well, I hope this doesn't last. I hope she cheats on me. Or I hope something happens to cause this thing to dissolve. At that point, they're committing to one another. I've not had people say, well, I'm taking this brand new job and I'm excited about it, but I sure hope I get fired from it. Or I'm going to seminary and I hope that we just about starve to death while I'm there. That's not those things that we ask for, but nevertheless, there are those kinds of troubles that come your way and my way. That's by providence. I didn't ask for it. But I've discovered for me, most of my problems are not the kind that just come my way, that it is a result of something else that has happened external that was not. Most of my problems and most of my troubles are self-inflicted. But whether they're self-inflicted or whether they come by providence, the truth of the matter is they're bigger than you and bigger than me. We must admit it. I cannot handle this myself. If we could handle it ourselves, then God would be an absentee landlord that put us on the face of the earth, set it in rotation and spinning, and walked off from it and just watches it spin down. But that's not what He does. He's involved in the affairs of men. He does not abandon us. You and I must admit we cannot handle it ourselves. To those of you who come into this state from other places, You know that this is the bayou state. Some are easier to traverse than others. Some are far difficult. I've been on a bunch of them. But the most dangerous bayou in this state is Bayou Self. It's when you think you can make it by yourself. I think we have a tendency to have a preschool mentality in life. I've got 4 daughters. I remember Dobson used to say, if you've got 3 children, one of them will be strong-willed. I had 3 out of 4 that were strong-willed, and one of them was off the chart. If you went to teach her how to ride a bike, I can do it myself, Daddy. And she can probably show you scars on her knees today where she did it herself. When it came to teaching her how to drive a car, I can do it myself, Daddy. I can show you my insurance premiums today where she did it herself. Yeah, I'm going to do it myself. And if you and I think that we can handle life's difficulties and troubles on our own, we will make a colossal mess out of life. Admit it. Hey, this is bigger than me. I can't handle it. I've got to cast it somewhere. Well, there's a second thing. Take it to the Lord. Now that may seem like, well, that should be well understood if you say cast. No, not necessarily. We have a tendency to take it somewhere. A lot of times, we just don't take it to the Lord. In fact, we're living in a day where most people simply say, boy, if I can watch one more Dr. Phil, or if Oprah will have one more guest, I'm sure that guest will have an answer for me. Or if just some way I could talk to Dr. Laura, or if I could talk to Doc Brown, or one of those, someone of them is going to have an answer for me in my troubles in life. And we take it everywhere but the right place. Now, if you think I'm saying that we don't need counsel, you're wrong. I've got a son-in-law that runs a counseling group, actually in Alabama. Apparently, he's busy. Apparently, a lot of people in Alabama need that. I'm not opposed to counsel. In fact, the Bible talks about the wisdom of the counsel of many, and I think there's wonderful counsel in the life of people in the church. The truth of the matter is, you won't even know who to take it to if you don't go to the Lord first. And we have a tendency to vacillate to those people who will give us bad advice. Have you ever noticed that? We'll go to people that we know that they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear so you can do exactly what you want to do. I'll give you a good example. I had a lady come to me one time, and she was a wife of one of our deacons. One of those families that I would have thought, boy, that's just the finest family that we have in our church. And she just came and she said, Wayne, I'm leaving. And she told me the name of her husband. And I said, oh, you got to be kidding. And so then she began to tell me about it. She said, well, this has been coming on for a long time. And she just kept on talking about what all had happened that brought it about. And as she kept on talking about it, I finally just sat there and said, how did you make the decision, though? I know you've got trouble. I understand that. How did you make the decision to leave? Oh, I talked to her, and I talked to her, and I talked to her. And I probably would fail counseling at this point. I said, do you realize you have talked to the 3 worst people you could have ever talked to? The reason why you talk to them is because she just did what you're going to do, and she just did what you're going to do, and she just did what you were going to do, and they are just dragging you right down where they are. You see, we have a tendency to do that. So what we have to do, we take it to the Lord first. That's why he says, come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden. And the promise is he'll give us rest. We take his yoke, that double yoke, and he's already in. Now, you can decide you're going to pull it with a single yoke. You're going to take care of all your problems on your own, and you've got them all burdened down in that cart, and you're going to just drag through life with that burden on you. Or you can decide, listen, we've got a double yoke here. He's already in it. He's going to pull, and I'm going to get in there with him. And he said, if you'll get in there, it's easy. And he'll give you rest. And there's the third thing. Trust him with those troubles. Now the word that he uses here is a word that's sustain. It may be more times. I found there's 3 times that I have discovered in the Old Testament that same word, the Hebrew, and I'm by no means a Hebrew scholar nor a Greek scholar. I'm like Fred Swank said, used to say all the time, Fred Swank said, I know a Greek who runs the restaurant, in Hebrew he runs the cleaners. But it's used 3 times. 2 times have reference to God sustaining. And here are the 2 times. It's once when Elijah goes down to the brook, and you remember Ahab, now he's down at the brook. God's providing the water through the brook, and the ravens are feeding him. Finally, the brook dries up. The ravens quit coming, and God says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down to Zarephath. There's a widow there that I've told to feed you. He goes there, and he finds that the widow is gathering up the sticks, and he confronts the widow, and he says, I need you to give me some meal. And, of course, she goes on and says, well, I've got just enough oil and enough meal to make one meal for me and my son, and then we're just going to die. And he says, trust me. You can trust the Lord. And said, you go ahead and make that meal, give me one, and he'll take care of it. Remember, they never ran out of meal, the grain. They never ran out of the oil during that whole time. Why? Because, and the word was, that God supplied, God sent. It is used in the longest prayer in the Bible, in the book of Nehemiah, the 9th chapter, where he goes through that whole litany of how God had cared for them and provided for them. And then he talks about that wandering in the wilderness. And as they were wandering in the wilderness, and he gets through talking about providing the manna, then he talks about the fact that they for 40 years wore the same clothes, and they did not wear out. And I'm going to tell you, every time we went to the mall, I tried to use that with my girls, but it didn't work. For 40 years, they wore the same clothes, and they didn't wear out. And for 40 years, they did nothing but walk, and their feet did not swell. Why? Because the Lord sustained them. Now get the picture here. He's talking about the eternal God. He's saying the same God who took care of Elijah and the widow and her son, the same God that took care of the people in the wilderness in their wandering and provided for them, is the same God who will take care of you and me in the midst of the struggles that we go through today. We can trust him. In fact, I listened to what we were singing a few minutes ago and what kind of God we've got, and I had jotted down some notes. He's the Almighty God. He is the awesome God. He's my advocate. He is the God who is well able. He is the faithful God. He's my fortress. He's my defender. He is my deliverer. He's the refuge from the oppressed. He's my shelter from the heat, shade from the heat. He's my shelter from the storm. He is my source. He is my hiding place. He's my ever-present help. He's the architect and builder of my soul. He is the potter who takes and molds the clay and mends the broken clay. He is the Holy One, the living God. He is the great I am. He is the Father of all compassions and the God of all comfort. He is the King of glory. He is the Maker. He's my rock. He's my peace, my helper, my shield. He is my healer. He is the one who gives encouragement and gives great endurance. He is my support. He is the name that is above all names. He is the spring of living water. He is the God who was and the God who is and the God who is to come. He is the God who does exceedingly abundantly above all that we think or ask. He is the God that we can trust in the midst of any trouble in life. We can trust him. We can trust him. You see, it doesn't matter what you go through. And some of you are going through it now. Some of you are going to get out there in some church somewhere, and Out of this crowd, there are going to be people, if we're the average crowd in the Southern Baptist life, there's some of you going to be terminated, forced to leave. There's some of you are going to find you're there and you're going to struggle, and you're struggling now with finances. And some of you are going to struggle with health problems. And you're going to have children that are going to go through troubles. You see, it comes whether we want it or not. But in the midst of it, cast your cares upon the Lord. For as Peter says, because He cares for you, and as David learned, He will sustain you. And so David ends his psalm by saying, as for me, I trust in you. Every head bowed. So our heads are bowed and eyes closed. I can't help but believe that there are some students, maybe some professors here today, that you are overcome and deeply burdened. You are overwhelmed, as David said. There are fears in your life. Maybe you're graduating and facing graduation, and you say, I just don't even have a place. I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe you're working on a terminal degree and you've got that project, or you've got that time limit on that dissertation, and it's approaching, and you say, man, I'm just having struggle. I'm trying to work. I'm trying to do my work at the church and try to get this thing through. And in the midst of it, my family is going through all kinds of troubles. I don't know. Maybe you got the word, or your family member, that you're sick with something that is, if not terminal, is debilitating. And you're willing to trust Him today. By an act, you're willing to say, I'm going to trust Him. I'm going to cast it on Him and trust Him. Now, here's what I'd like us to do.